Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's about time, so we should get started. All right, so before we start the discussion, let me introduce my colleagues, Dr. Thanapan Laiprakop Sap, the Associate Dean for Research Affairs and Academic Services, and Associate Professor, Department of Government, to deliver welcome remarks. Please, Ajahn.
It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this significant seminar as we mark a decade of the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Today, we aim to evaluate China's visionary endeavor in building the BRI and to delve into its profound impact on Southeast Asia, more specifically on Thailand. The BRI, with its expansive network of trade and infrastructure projects, has been a pivotal force in shaping the world's economic landscape, especially in Southeast Asia. For Thailand, this initiative has been a gateway to enhanced connectivity, economic diversification, and strengthen regional cooperation. It has been opened venues for large-scale infrastructure development, increased trade, and has significantly contributed to socio-economic growth of the region. However, concern regarding the BRI has also been raised by various quarters, reflecting a complex mix of geopolitical, economic, environmental considerations. These include, for example, the issues of debt sustainability, environmental impacts, transparency and governance, the quality of investment, as well as geopolitical influence. As we gather here, we look forward to exploring the multifaceted aspects of BRI, understanding its role in the development of Southeast Asia and assessing its future potentials. This seminar will serve as a platform for sharing insights, discussing challenges, and foreseeing how the BRI will continue to play a role in the global political economy, especially in our region. Crucially, the fluctuating progress of the BRI serve as a barometer of China's interactions with the international community. This topic acquires added significance in the current global landscape, which is increasing, influenced by major power dynamics. The response of Western nations, notably the United States, and China's assertive role is a key factor shaping the international environment. This evolving scenario presents smaller and medium-sized nations with complex dilemmas and heightened challenges in formulating and executing their foreign policy and strategies. I am confident that our panelists, being distinguished experts in their own fields, will provide enlightening perspective on the BRI and its global and regional efforts. On behalf of the Faculty of Political Science, I extend our heartfelt gratitude for accepting the ISIS Thailand's invitations. Your expertise, insights, viewpoints are crucial as we navigate the complex dynamics of the BRI and its impact on the future of Southeast Asia and Thailand. Additionally, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our audience for your presence today. Your engagement in the ISIS Thailand's public events, as well as the faculty broader activities, is deeply valued. We appreciate your ongoing support. Thank you very much. And most importantly, I would like to thank Frederick Norman Foundation for their support. Without the FNF support, we wouldn't have such a great activity like today. Finally, I am optimistic that today's discussions will be enlightening and engaging for all. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Thanapan, for your remarks. As he mentioned, right, that the BRI has a tremendous impact on the global political economy as well as in Southeast Asia and in Thailand. Time passes very quickly, and now we have already entered the first decade of the BRI. Therefore, it's about time, right, to sort of like look back and look forward what the BRI is going to be. So, what have we seen in the past 10 years? Right? Any positive outcome? Any concerns that the world has experienced? And what have we, as living in the global South, experienced at home? What are the global and regional implications of the BRI for current geopolitical and geoeconomic context? What should we expect in the future? So these are the quick key questions that we would like to delve into to help us understand by these experts sitting with us today. So, but before we let them discuss about the issues, let me properly introduce our distinguished panelists. I'm sure all of you know everyone here on the panel, through their writing, research, and appearance on media. So the first one next to me is Dr. Yot Santasombat. So Ajahn Yot is the Emeritus Professor at Chiang Mai University and teaching at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in the Faculty of Social Sciences. So he writes and edits numerous books, and one of the themes focuses on Mekong sub-region and BRI. The latest one probably you see on the pamphlet, China's BRI in Southeast Asia, Concept and Methodologies. So I believe he will give us some nuances and interesting perspective on the nexus between economic and sociological impact of the BRI very well. Next one, probably I need not introduce much. If you are the frequent attendant of ISIS event, you should be familiar with him better than me. Dr. Thitinan Pongsathira. So Ajahn Thitinan is the professor in international relations at our faculty, and now the senior research fellows in ISIS Thailand. So his research focuses on pretty much geopolitics and Thai domestic politics. So he writes as well a lot of books, articles, chapters, and over 1,000 op-eds as appear in the international media. So he received several awards, from 2015 to 2019. For example, the prize for excellence in opinion writing from Society of Publishers in Asia, appointed as ASEAN at 50 Fellow by New Zealand Minister of Foreign Affairs, and lately he got selected as Australia ASEAN Fellows at Sydney Lowy Institute. The last one to my left, Dr. Tang Niran. So currently Dr. is Director of China Studies Center at the Chulalongkorn University, and he is the faculty member of the law faculty in Chulalongkorn University as well. So his research interests are in the area of Chinese law, international economic law, development studies. So he also writes, several books: China 5.0, Chimerica, China's Next Normal, which topped the bestseller in Thailand. Many of us must have been familiar with him, as he appeared on various media platforms as well. So as you all see, our panelists today are certainly of high caliber, and we have a high hope that all of you will be able to help us understand BRI better in different dimensions. So before we start, let me briefly give you the structure of this discussion. So within the next 2 hours, first we're gonna divide into 3 parts. The first part, I will try to let the speakers spend around like 15 to 20 minutes, depending on them. Talking about like BRI in the past 10 years, what it has achieved, what it failed, what are the impact of global and regional or even Thai economy. The second part, I will perhaps throw some of the key questions, for each panelist to discuss and to evaluate the current context. Within the current context, how can we see BRI fitting within this current context, and how the BRI is moving forward, in the future, considering the current Chinese economy, international criticism of the BRI, the geopolitical implications and landscape, at the current moment. And the last, we'll open the floor for your questions if you have any. So without further ado, let me start with Ajahn as a close observer of China, right? Chinese politics and Chinese economy, perhaps you can tell us about the BRI in its essence, right? Many observers think the idea of BRI actually stemmed from, how the Chinese government addresses its own or solve its own economic problem at home, right? So especially from oversupplied capitals. The BRI, the strategy to encourage Chinese capital, Chinese firms to invest overseas. Hence, the necessity to build connectivities, infrastructures, and facilitate those kind of activities outside China. So some argue that it's a grand strategy to strengthen China's economic clout, and political influence, across the world, and to pave the way in which China has emerged as a global superpower and dominate and change the international borders at the end. So, what is your take on this? Based on your take, how has China achieved or failed to achieve those goals?
Thank you very much, Ajahn Pongpisut, for inviting me to join this distinguished panel, and good morning to everyone. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was a senior Chinese researcher from Belt and Road Institute, something in Beijing, visiting Chulalongkorn University, and asked for a meeting with the China Study Center. So I went to the meeting. The topic is to discuss about the BRI. At the time, I went into the meeting and then I told him that, okay, today we are going to discuss about One Belt, One Road, right? That's the initial term of the BRI. And then his first response is that we are not using the word One Belt, One Road anymore. We are now using the Belt and Road and then the BRI, right? So there's a shift in the names. The Chinese name is always the same, Itai Ilu. But the English translation has shifted from the Silk Road Initiative, One Belt, One Road, Belt and Road, BRI. But the major shift is between the One Belt, One Road and the BRI, the Belt and Road. So one time, all the translation is One Belt, One Road, and then the next time it's all they cut down the one, right? And so my first question to the Chinese delegation at the time is why the change in the name? And their response is quite interesting because they said that people misunderstood the One Belt, One Road. Because when you say One Belt, One Road, people often think about 2 lines, right? One economic belt, one maritime Silk Road, and then they draw up the line, and then they bring up the magnifying glass to see which country the route or the line pass through. And I know a lot of you know that at the initial time of the One Belt, One Road, there's a debate, even in Thailand, whether Thailand is a part of One Belt, One Road. I remember a lot of newspaper articles, they put up the map, the Chinese map or the map in the English media, and then they try to see if the line passed through Thailand. And as you can see from this picture, right, the line doesn't really directly pass through Thailand. And then when they held the One Belt, One Road summit, Thailand wasn't invited to be a part, and then there's a big debate in Thailand whether Thailand is still a part of this initiative. But the Chinese delegation, they told me that this is all our misunderstanding, because we took the One Belt, One Road as 2 lines, and then as a very strict, very concrete concept. it seems that when people talk about One Belt, One Road, they would ask which countries are in the One Belt, One Road, which projects are in the One Belt, One Road, which state-owned enterprises in China will participate in the One Belt, One Road. It's all about trying to fit something in the box, trying to say that what are the parts of the Belt and Road and what are not the part of the Belt and Road. But he told me that that's all misunderstanding because the Belt and Road is a symbolic initiative, a symbolic gesture. Ajahn Pongpisut used the term grand strategy, right? But it's a symbolic idea about the new roles of China in the global order, the new roles of China in the region, the new roles of China regarding the relationship between China and developing nations. So it's more of a big idea rather than a concrete legislation, a concrete project, a concrete strategy. So when I say a big idea, I mean that this idea can be evolved, right? Can develop and can have new meaning, new concepts from time to time. So the Belt and Road is not one constant project that there's 10, 100 projects within the Belt and Road, or there's 4 points content in the Belt and Road, and then that's it, right? I think it's a big symbolic concept that's ready to evolve through time. So that's why they say they cut down the one, because the terms Belt and Road would be more symbolic and would not lead to such a misunderstanding. Now, 10 years ago, people are excited about the Belt and Road. When Xi Jinping first developed this initiative, it was still a good time, better time of China-US relationship. At the time, it was during President Obama's tenure. Right? So many countries are still eager to participate, to engage with the Belt and Road with China. Of course, things have changed tremendously through the past 10 years, especially during the past 5 years, and arguably during the past 3 years, pre-COVID, post-COVID. Now, and actually in the past 2 years with the war in Ukraine, many European countries are now more reluctant to say that they proactively engage with the BRI. We see that the recent summit of the BRI, there's a comparison between the photos of leaders joining the first, the second, and the third summit, and you can see the drop in the attendance and the interest or the willing to show that you are a part of this project initiated by China. Of course, we know that there's 2 important dimensions about the Belt and Road. One is about infrastructure, connectivity, but another is also about energy routes for China, right? And I think that a lot of people talk about the Belt and Road as related to energy security of China. It's about developing pipelines, energy routes, ways of thinking about transporting energy to serve the huge demand of the Chinese population. Now, Ajahn Pongpisut raised the questions from the Chinese perspective. What are the functions or purposes of the BRI? Ajahn Pongpisut mentioned at least 2 dimensions. One is more domestic. Does the BRI serve China's own domestic purposes? Or is it like a huge ambition for China to engage with the world in new terms, in new ways, as related to its changing status in the world order as related to its rising power. Now I want to focus more on the domestic reasons. Right? And I think that for the domestic reasons, of course, the BRI serves the nationalistic purpose. When you say Silk Road, you think about the very good time during the Tang Dynasty when China was the center of the world. So there's historical resonance, historical symbolic piece within the idea. And then in China, there's a lot of debate. People outside of China often talk about the China model. What is the China model? People often talk about whether China has an ambition to export its political model to the world, its communist ideology, its basic governance structure. And actually, I would argue that that's not really the main purpose or the ways the Chinese government think about the world, right? Because the Chinese government actually think that China is an exception to the universal rule or universal norm, rather than saying that they want to export the China's governance model to the world or export China's Communist Party model to the rest of the region. But they don't want other people to interfere, right, with their model of governance, with their system, or to say that, or they have to adapt it into a Western system. But from the Chinese perspective, or from Chinese academic literature, the major contribution China can provide or can offer to the world is in the economic dimension, especially its economic development model. So the BRI, in a way, is the export, not of China's governance model, ideology, but rather of China's development model, China's economic model, which is mainly about infrastructure building. There's a saying in China that you build roads, you build railways, that's what development is. And then about urbanization, building of cities, and then about connectivity, connecting different ports, different cities, different places through railroads, through different hubs of logistics. Actually, the railroad, the building of railroads idea can be traced back to during Dr. Sun Yat-sen. There is in the writing of Dr. Sun Yat-sen during the Republic of China's era, there's this idea, the concept of development in China is mainly about infrastructure building, connectivity, urbanization. And you see the development of city clusters in China through different 5 years plan, meaning they have huge cities and then they link different cities together through railways. And China said that we can help the world or developing nations do this. Right? The idea is that if developing countries can develop its economy, can develop its infrastructure, getting richer, China, right, as a major trading nation, will also benefit from the rise of the West, besides just the success of the West. Now, when we talk about the Belt and Road, I often emphasize in my presentation to the Thai audience that China is mainly doing business. It's not the idea of China as a missionaries spreading Confucius ideas, spreading communist idea, or spreading universal ideologies for everyone. Right? It's mainly about doing business. So they have to think about profits. They have to think about, I think we will discuss about that trap diplomacy, right? But they have to think about the feasibility of the project, and and the economic benefits of the project, not just through the receiving nations, but also to China, right? And I think this is a very important in understanding BRI, that it's mainly about providing opportunities also for Chinese state-owned enterprises, for Chinese businesses to go abroad. And then with this idea, I would argue that the BRI will still remain even through the midst of China's economic downturn, because with less opportunities at home, a lot of Chinese state-owned enterprises and Chinese businesses, for them to grow, they have to go abroad. So in a way, with China's economic problems now, we might see a more proactive BRI, but not in terms of the Chinese state, but in terms of Chinese businesses and state-owned enterprise. BRI is also a solution to China's domestic problems, especially the overcapacity problem. And there's an argument that actually BRI is about exporting China's excess capacity to the world. Right? China is good at building railways, producing a lot of steel. Then they can export this excess capacity, these excess labors to their neighboring countries and help them develop the infrastructure. So that's the basic starting point of the BRI in terms of serving China's own interests. Now, the last point I want to mention in my first round, because I also come from the Faculty of Law, so I think I will give some legal perspective to all of you about the BRI. Right? And at the start of the BRI, people often compare the BRI to the Marshall Plan of the US. Especially, they say that actually Chinese academics, Chinese scholars actually developed the BRI from looking at the Marshall Plan in the past. But the BRI is strikingly very different from the Marshall Plan, because the Marshall Plan is a piece of legislation passed through the US Congress. It has concrete content. It has the list of projects within the Marshall Plan. It has a very concrete budget. How much money will be spent on the Marshall Plan? Right? The Belt and Road is, as I mentioned, symbolic, right? Very open to evolution, or very flexible. It's like a box, and you can put anything in there. So, in this sense, the BRI document is not a legal document. It's not a piece of legislation. It's not a treaty. The BRI document in China is just a kind of guidance, as well as a form of proclamation paper, right, saying that this is what we are going to do. But it's fundamentally different from the usual basis of international economic cooperation carried out under multilateral treaties. So people in China would say that it's soft law. Right? It's a soft legal infrastructure rather than a hard law treaties. And in this sense, the BRI lacks a multilateral treaty covering all participating nation states. It doesn't have a secretariat or other central body to standardize projects and provide a forum for deliberation and development. I still remember that actually there's a proposal in the past, Ajahn Pongpisut, for the Thai government to have an ambassador to the BRI, just similar to the ambassador to ASEAN. But it would be a misunderstanding, right? Because the BRI is not a concrete organization with a secretariat, with a treaty, and especially in the legal sense, it doesn't have a uniform dispute resolution system that can offer an acceptable level of legal certainty. actually to conclude, the BRI is not a multilateral type of framework. Even though you say more than 100 nations participate, but the BRI is more bilateral. It's an instrument that when China discuss with each country, China would say, oh, we have this BRI, right? But it's more bilateral rather than multilateral. So I will stop there for my first round, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ajahn. It's very elucidating in many dimensions that we might, pick some of your points for the next round of discussions, about the BRI, especially how the international communities look at the BRI. As you mentioned, BRI is just like not multilateral organizations or projects, but there are some consequences, right, that we have seen in global development, and I will come back to those points regarding BRI. But next, let me see Southeast Asia, right? Thailand, for example, we are geographically very close to China, and probably is one of the target of the BRI projects that China wants to roll out. As according to the good neighbor policy since Deng Xiaoping, right? Southeast Asia is one of the sort of showcase to show China's goodwill. And then now I'll turn to Ajahn Yot. What's the implications and what's the impact of the BRI when China started to expand, the projects and implementations to Southeast Asia and even Thailand? Has it giving us any benefits, or it fell in some aspect that you based on your research, perhaps you can give us some nuances, based on sociological perspective, about the BRI on in the region. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. What I would like to share with you this morning is what I would like to share with you this morning is based on an ongoing research. And I have to say at the outset that unlike my distinguished colleagues here, I'm not China expert. I am a student of anthropology. I am a Southeast Asianist. So my concern with BRI has to do with its impact on Southeast Asia, not about China itself, okay? And as I said, this is an ongoing research. But I would like to say that since its inception, BRI is shrouded in confusion and controversy. It is, just like Ajahn mentioned, it cannot be defined simple as something, as an organization. So it is very difficult to understand. And the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown over the past few years, and the continuing economic problems facing China is also added additional challenges for our understanding of the BRI. From our research, we do a comprehensive literature review, and it shows that most of the existing academic studies of BRI are based on macro analysis, top-down approach, and theoretical deliberation. Few empirical studies that deal with BRI mega projects and their relationship with local realities can be found. Against this backdrop, our research attempts to identify the potential impact of BRI in several countries. Because of the limited budget, we can do only a few countries in We cannot do Philippines and Indonesia. We can do Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, and that's about it. So what we do is that we conduct empirical research and case studies in various research sites to gain first-hand ethnographic data on the risk and benefits of the BRI at local, national, and regional level. And right now we have just completed our data collection on local sites, but we haven't done any national comparative review or regional level analysis. What we do is that we try to introduce what we call anthropology of regionalization. It's an experiment that concerns with the adaptation of ethnographic practices to larger and more complex object of study, while at the same time engaging the voice approach that allow the marginal subalterns to speak. So against this backdrop of China's expansionism, we are adapting our research from conventional single-site fieldwork to multiple sites of observation that cross-cut dichotomies such as the local and regional or global context. So in a sense, BRI is an object of study that cannot be investigated by focusing on a single site of intensive observation. You need to do multiple sites altogether. You need to look at the mega concepts and narratives of China's redesigning regionalism and world order, and also trace cultural patterns across and within multiple sites of BRI's project. And in a sense, reconstructs aspects of BRI itself through the connections it suggests among different projects in Southeast Asia. So the term multi-sited ethnography that we use in this research collapse the distinction between local sites and the global system. In a sense, researchers identified systemic realities in situated local sites and studied the BRI system directly on the ground. This required a willingness to leave behind the bounded field site and follow the production, the metaphor, the plot, the conflict, the people, and their stories as they travel from place to place and move between different media. Through these modes of construction, multi-sited ethnography allows us to engage with large-scale entities such as BRI without losing the intimate portrayal of people's experiences and subjectivities. So what we are concerned in terms of what we try to find out in our research, in our multi-sited ethnographic research, involve a search for cultural logics and strategies of connections, which the Chinese officials always claim about connectivities. That is the so-called cultural logic of BRI. So in a sense, our project assess the impact of BRI through only two sites, but each site comprise many local sites. We look at special economic zones and high-speed train project. Let me briefly talk about these two projects. For special economic zones, I think if you look at China, in China, special economic zones, I think Ajahn Am could clarify this better than me. Special economic zones are carefully planned in China, and it's based on zoning technologies. The desired outcomes are not simply economic growth, but improved learning processes, improved human resources, improved technologies. That's what in China it's about. But in Southeast Asia, many special economic zones are out of the way connectivity. By out of the way connectivity, I mean it is a part of transnational crime, a knock-off effect of BRI. So these special economic zones are based on crony capitalism. They're based on claimed land concession in many different countries. We can say it's land grab in a way. And it's also about entertainment industries. The aim was to allow interest groups within and outside China to repackage their activities as supporting the BRI. And this is elasticity, the flexibility of the term BRI that is in question. The strategic ambiguity of BRI was quickly picked up by Chinese criminal syndicates. In Thailand, we call it Jin Tao, right, the gray Chinese, as they sought to take advantage from BRI's flexibility. So many special economic zones. This one is the Union Development in Kok Kung. It is about to finish. The airport is also constructed in these special economic zones. And fisher villages were moved uphill. No one can stay there. The villagers now flee to Phnom Penh or other cities. This is the King's Romans. Just across the Mekong River from Chiang Saen. And again, you see that houses made when they relocate, the people are very modern, but it is now empty because villagers cannot stay here. It is not their way of life. This is still, and this is the Bo Kaeo new airport, about to be finished. I took this months ago. I think now it is about to be open, and it will take direct flight from Hainan to Bo Kaeo, and also from other cities in China to support the King's Romans casinos. But 5 minutes from these, this is also another product of Chinese investment, Chinese banana plantation, which has now have a lot of impact on Laos, especially near the Mekong River. No lowlanders allowed work in these banana plantation these days. So they employed a lot of Khmu Midlanders or the Hmong Highlanders to work. And the working situation is quite pitiful. So in many special economic zones, Sihanoukville, Chue Koko, these are our sites, Kok Kong, King's Romans. They are designed as casinos with subversive economy, human trafficking, call center headquarters, and all these special economic zones claim to be a part of BRI. If you go to Chue Koko, the leader, the owner of the Chue Koko will say to you, will tell you that, oh, we are part of BRI. We don't know if it's true or not, okay? We just report what we have heard. But even a more legitimate special economic zones, such as the EEC, has many environmental risks. As you have known, this is in Rayong. When EEC was operating many years ago, this one is taken in early 60s. It's BE, right? 2560. Okay. So you see all the pollution that is surrounding Rayong these days. And this is a product of EEC that have an impact on local communities. And the question is, how much tax money will be spent trying to rectify this problem that comes with special economic zones, where the rich investor can make profit. We also have case studies of the railway. And this one is in Laos. One of our research looked at Na Thoi, which is a station in Laos, and find that a lot of people were relocated to pave way for the construction of the railway. This is the map of Na Thoi, okay? And even in Thailand, we also find problems in Korat, where railway communities are now being resettled, relocated. And they ask the questions, do the poor have their rights? No one answered them. There is no room for negotiation because all these projects are mostly top-down. In a sense, both Laos and Thailand, and we are now doing Malaysia too, the railway in Malaysia. But in Laos and Thailand, both countries began with a predominantly top-down approach that affected communities, local communities. And these people are grappled with ambiguities because there's no clear answer. The unclear timeline is what's killing the people. The scope of construction also, another aspect of uncertainty. Another issue that I would like to talk with you is about border trade. I just pick one, the cattle and buffalo trade in the Mekong region. Now, through BRI, China has started what they call formalization of trade. And they're imposing formal regulations and infrastructures over the borderland. So the Myanmar and Laos are chosen. I'm not sure about Myanmar now, but Laos are now official partners for the trade of buffaloes and cattle to go over to China. Thailand was a central hub for the fattening process. But now, the farmers are abandoned because Thailand is not included in China's formalization plan. And this is what the farmers are complaining. Even in Vietnam, the Thai Nung in the border of northern Vietnam are also experiencing these problems. They used to spend 4 months fattening the buffaloes and then ship it across the border to China. And you may say that, oh, this is small business, but a week there's 4,000 buffaloes that go across the border. But now the borders are closed and the local people are suffering. They used to have big trucks like this to transport buffaloes over the border. And now they are left like lone buffaloes. So this is the pictures that I leave you to see how the local people feel quite lonely under BRI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Yun. With that kind of those vivid pictures, you can see some of the impact, the concerns that the BRI has brought about to the regions, right? Perhaps some of the issues that both panelists raised in this first session was that, as Ajahn was mentioning, BRI is kind of loose, some kind of policies, different actors, trying to grab the opportunity to tap into these BRI, sort of like sanctifications, right? Opportunities and justifying their activities, and government agencies, business firms, local government, or even cities, like in China, trying to use these justifications to expand their activities, including those gray business from China. So somehow, you probably cannot expect the Chinese government to directly control everything, on the ground. And then that's why we see a lot of impacts, especially in Southeast Asia, where Ajahn was mentioning about, they normally are involved in knockoff, industries and investments and crony capitalism. So that's criticisms that we have heard in many regions. But there are some different views across the world, right? Where they experience BRI differently. In Southeast Asia, perhaps we see a negative impact. But if you probably go to African continent, right, the perceptions of the BRI and China's perhaps is quite positive. The other regions may see more negative impact from the debt trap, from the environmental impact that Ajahn was mentioning, transnational crime spreading along the new road, new connectivities, or entrenchment of the autocracies in governance. So these different views about the BRI reflects how much the BRI impact the global economy, right? And these also bring about the suspicions of Beijing, right, about its real intentions for starting the BRI in the first place. So that comes to a very early issues that I was mentioning, in the beginning of this seminar. So about what the world actually perceives BRI to be. Is it merely address the domestic problem, that Ajahn was mentioning, or is it a grand plan, for China to rise, to influence the global politics? So today, has the BRI really challenged the rule-based order or U.S. international orders that we experienced since the post-war? No one is better than Ajahn Thitinan to answer these questions. So the floor is yours, Ajahn. So please elucidate us.
Thank you, ขอบคุณครับ อาจารย์ พงษ์ พิสุทธิ์ and good morning to everyone. I won't take long. I just want to make 2 points about BRI on the 10-year anniversary. First, to look at how it began, and then to look at where it is today. So the conclusion I have is that you can if you take a positive view, you would say the BRI is just fine. It's working. It's out there. If you take a negative view, you would have to say that it's stalling. It's being stymied. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's hard to conclude that it has succeeded. It certainly will not go away. when it began in 2012-13, BRI is it directly coincided with the rise of Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping. I did a research project for the ADB in 2018-2019, and we looked at the Belt and Road. There are 6 corridors, and the corridor running through mainland Southeast Asia was called the CICPEC, China, Indochina, CIC, Peninsula, China-Indochina Peninsula Economic Corridor, CIC, PEC. And this is the connection, the corridor connecting the Belt and Road. And the Belt and Road, as you know, is counterintuitive. The road is in the sea and the belt is on the land. So in this research project, I came out with a paper, and I argued that BRI was China's grand strategy. It was grand strategy, and I called it the China's manifest resurgence. Manifest resurgence, analogous to the U.S. manifest destiny, which meant that China had the right to reclaim its glorious past, that it had this glory before, 1,000 years ago. And if you look at the map of the Belt and the Road, it really kind of resembles the old Silk Road, And if you look at the maritime routes, they coincide, or they really kind of overlap the Zhang He's expedition, maritime expedition from 6 centuries ago. So BRI had a historical basis. It didn't come out from nowhere. It didn't come out of a vacuum. It was not just an idea. It had history. It had roots. And so in 12-13, when it came up, and then when I did this study at that time before COVID, I likened it to a kind of China's manifest resurgence. The manifest part had 2 components. One is that they had entitlement. China is entitled to reclaim what it had. And the second component was that it was inevitable that China would rise up again. So it was this two components to this argument. And if you look at the Belt and Road, the official name initially was Silk Road Economic Belt on the land, and then Maritime Silk Road in the sea. It was, as mentioned earlier, a way of managing China's excess capacity. In 2012-2013, remember, the Chinese economy had been expanding 9.1% a year since 1991, right? And so, it was doubling, the base was doubling, and I think domestically, all these, construction firms, a lot of Chinese capital, they were facing domestic saturation in a way. So BRI was a way of expanding markets, expanding capacity from inside to outside, and also securing markets, energy routes, and so on. So when it came up, there was a lot of excitement, and remember there was a low base. So, a low base meaning that it was brand new. So there was a lot of space to grow. Now, what has happened during that time, since it came out, there's a lot of excitement that greeted BRI, and initially people got confused with the One Belt, One Road, and then, the Belt and Road. So it became a consensus eventually that this was a one monolithic grand strategy, China's projection, geo-economic projection into the world based on historical roots and rights, mainland, the Asian landmass, the maritime routes all the way down to East Africa. That's what China had 1,000 years ago, 600 years ago. It had that exploration. So a lot of excitement, and initially the response was also very receptive. A lot of countries were interested. Remember when they set up the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the China Development Bank, a lot of countries joined, a lot of countries in Europe, a lot of countries in Asia and Africa. So it was seen as a win-win for a time initially. And then as it was launched, as it was implemented, a lot of countries were interested. Of course, China lent a lot of loans. Chinese construction companies had a lot of projects, contracts. It was seen as kind of a way of internationalization of the renminbi, of Chinese know-how, engineering, and so on. And this came all the way over here to Thailand. Thailand was supposed to build a rail project from Nong Khai, 607 kilometers long, connecting Nong Khai all the way to Bangkok. And then eventually it was supposed to go down to Malaysia, East Coast, railway, and then all the way down to Singapore. This was the SIGPEC. Now, it has stalled in our zone, but the Lao project has been completed. And I took a field trip to Vientiane, took the train. It is a good train. It is a good train. The tracks are really smooth, and they had a lot of course tunnels and bridges over mountains and through the mountains. Laos is very mountainous, and the one thing that struck me, and I'll just share this anecdote, is that the train, it feels like, if you go to China, you go to a train station, it feels like China. The train station and all the signs, it just feels like China. And inside the train, it also feels like China because there were no advertisements. The BTS, the MRT, all the trains in the US or most countries, you would have commercials and advertisements. This train was clean, and it ran smoothly, pretty fast too. So it reduced the time from Vientiane to Long Bang down to 2 hours instead of 7 hours by road, 2 hours by train, and it was a smooth train. So it worked, but that's the main part. It has not connected through Thailand, and I don't think it will ever go all the way down to Singapore. But I think for Thailand down to Bangkok would be the key for this SIGPEC plan. But this goes to show that Belt and Road, it has made some headway, but far less than anticipated, far less than planned. And the reason is because it has faced some pushback. So, when the Belt and Road came out, the Obama grand strategy was about this pivot rebalance from Atlantic to Pacific. But when Trump came up, so Obama did not really have a strong response to China's assertiveness, not just BRI, but you also have to look at China's construction of artificial islands in the South China Sea, construction of upstream dams in the Mekong River. So BRI was just a broader strategy. But I think the overarching aim was to reclaim historical greatness. But perhaps even beyond that, you can interpret Chinese historical greatness in different ways. But we also saw a lot of assertiveness in South China Sea, mainland Southeast Asia, the Mekong dams. So the response from the U.S. under Obama was not very strong. On the South China Sea in particular, when on Scarborough Shoal, the Philippines took China to court, won the case. The Obama administration did not really back it up. Trump came in, and I think Trump really pushed back hard against BRI, against China, the trade war, technology, and then the free and open Indo-Pacific. So this began the pushback, the process, the overt, conscious containment, if you will, encirclement or pushing back against China's expansion. And it worked. I think it worked to some degree. This is why BRI is kind of stalling in some places. And there was a lot of talk about debt diplomacy, which it has, I think, reached a consensus that debt diplomacy is exaggerated. A lot of countries that were in debt, like Sri Lanka, for example, had other creditors, not just China. So the pushback from the U.S. Included, the FOIP, but also the Blue Dot Network, the BUILD Act, remember? And the Trump tariff war, technology war. And then the U.S. working the Quad countries, the Australia, Japan, India, the AUKUS, even more recently, and the various engagements geostrategic engagements, the U.S. began to push back hard, and making a dilemma in some cases, making some countries having to choose between U.S. and China. So I don't want to take any more time, but just to conclude, so you can see how it's being stalled in Myanmar. Laos completed, but Thailand still stalled. Some places in Africa making some headway, but also slowing down. And finally now, I think it is, the future of BRI is not as bright as when it first began. And the reason is because of the domestic sources of strength, domestic sources of growth. When BRI came up, Chinese economy was very dynamic, very vibrant. You know, looking at that time, growth was 7, 8, 9%. Now growth is much slower, maybe 2, 3, 4% if they're lucky. And there's a lot of talk about Chinese economic slowdown, and even the Japanification of China, which means that China is facing the diminishing returns that China saw, that Japan saw earlier, that China is facing now, which means that you cannot grow at 9% forever. And that now you have, excess capacity, real estate bubbled, a lot of debt in China, and this is a kind of a reckoning that China is now facing. So the domestic sources of growth are much weaker than before, and therefore I think the thrust of the BRI has slowed down. And I don't think it will go away. It will kind of pan out. You know, you look at different countries, Sri Lanka, Myanmar certainly is uncertain now, but Thailand, I think the rail will be constructed 5 to 10 years, and certainly mainland Southeast Asia and the Mekong region is within China's orbit. But even in Bandung, the Bandung-Jakarta rail is, I don't think it'll make money. The consensus is that it's not going to be profitable, but it is very exciting for the Indonesians. So it's a mixed picture on BRI. I think that it has not succeeded the way that it was envisaged in 2012, 2013, but it is making some headway, and it is, I think, making some claim, some reclamation of China's former glory and greatness. And I think that around here, we will see some evidence firsthand with the Lao Rail, and I think the eventual extension to Thailand.
Thank you, Ajahn Thitinan. That's a good hope because, as we perhaps know the estimations by the OECD, a couple of years ago, the report was kind of suggesting that developing countries still need development fund, especially on infrastructure development. Perhaps there's a gap around 45%, that they need, right? So one of the benefits of BRI is that China's helped to fill this gap. But then of course we have talked about the negative implications of the BRI, transparency and governance issues, debt problems that we especially mentioned, environmental concerns that Ajahn was mentioning, and even the issues of exporting China models that Ajahn was mentioning, supporting authoritarian or prolonging authoritarian regimes, in developing nations. So Ajahn said China doesn't want to export this kind of authoritarianism, but Xi Jinping's, we have heard him speaking about Chinese characteristic that he wants to promote in the world scale. So that's some kind of conflicting pictures that we have seen in a couple of years. So this affects public perception, right, of the BRI in a negative vein. So my first question is from this onward is going to be about how we see the BRI now and beyond. Do you think these criticism would prompt the Chinese to readjust, the strategies, the projects to address these problems, right, of the BRI? Do we see such a sign of policy readjustment in China's government? We've seen recently, the Chinese restructured loan, owned by the Sri Lanka and Zambia, to what to be the latest demonstration of the goodwill, toward developing countries. We also see BRI projects started to partner with Western financial institutions in recent years. So, like with the due process and due diligence. So perhaps this is going to be like one of the, attempts to readjust these kind of, BRI projects to reduce public criticism against these grand strategies. So what do you think, China is going to do in perhaps like the next 5 years or 10 years? Perhaps I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Pong Pisut. It's interesting because you see a lot of new initiatives from China. It used to be the Belt and Road, and then everyone here confirmed that it's going to stay, and it's going to stay because it's already put in the Chinese constitution. There's a Belt and Road is written into the preamble of the Chinese constitution in the latest modification. But you also see that there's new ideas, new terms. For example, Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative. So many concepts. I was actually went to Ajahn Yot's research symposium last month, and there's a discussion about the difference between the BRI and the Global Development Initiative. And the debate is whether the Global Development Initiative will replace the BRI or it will complementary, supplement each other, or is the Global Development Initiative is like the next stage of the BRI? Is it a part of the BRI? Or this logical relationship between the two, right? And as I often say, when you think about all these things, it's a big idea. You can put anything into these boxes, and basically, I would argue that the difference between the Belt and Road and the Global Development Initiative is that the Belt and Road, as I argue, it's bilateral. Right? It's when China go out and talk to different partners, different countries. They say, okay, we have this Belt and Road. We want to do infrastructure development. We want to build connectivity. Let's discuss what we can do together, right? But it's bilateral. Now, the Global Development Initiative is something that China put forth in the United Nations, and it's coincide with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's more multilateral in a sense that it's an idea China used in the United Nations platform. Global Civilization Initiative, as Ajahn Pong Pisut mentioned, there's a debate not just about China's exporting its economic model, but also there's concerns, there's discomfort about the possibility of China's exporting its governance model or its political ideology, right? And I argue in one of the recent papers I wrote that actually China provides an example of being an exception to the norm, of being an exception to the universal rule. Right? It doesn't have to be liberal democracy. It doesn't have to westernize in a political sense. And just by being that example of an exception, it becomes an inspiration to many regimes, right? So it's not that China is exporting its regimes, but that because China is there, it's rising, it's successful in its economic development, then it provides an argument for conservatives or for other regimes to say that we can be different, right? And that's, I think, the major risks of the rise of China in in that political sense. Now, I want to mention a little bit about the current problem in the Chinese economy, right? Because I think that's a major factor that we need to think about the roles of China going forward into the future, whether it can still remain as assertive as it was. And if you look through the literature, you can see both arguments. There are some groups that would argue that China have to be more domestic focused. It has less ambitions abroad. It obviously has less resources, less money, and linked to the sentiment at home. If it's go abroad, paying for many different projects, there will be questions raised of how it's solved. Why don't it start with solving the problems at home, right? So that's one argument that China will be less assertive. But we also see some arguments that actually, with the problems in China will be more assertive because it wants to project more nationalistic sentiment. It wants to divert the attention from its domestic problems to the domestic audience. It wants to project this image of China rising, of China still being influential, China being a major player. We are doing great. And I also see, right, the argument that the risks for war, the risks for this sense of diverging attention would increase. So I think that there's a mixed signal here, and I think perhaps both are true, right? I think that China will still remain very assertive, but it has to be more selective. Ajahn Pongpisut mentioned the West, the West meaning that they use a lot of resources inefficiently. Actually, there's an argument that the initiation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank at its initial stage is to provide China with a framework of financing projects, of thinking through the feasibility of the projects. Before the AIIB, there's nothing of an infrastructure, of a mechanism to think through the feasibility of each project. It's like China throwing money around, and at the time they have a lot of money, right? So we see through the past 10 years, there are also efforts to institutionalize the BRI. There are efforts to react to criticism. Actually, with the third summit of the BRI, Xi Jinping talks a lot about the green Belt and Road, the high quality Belt and Road. So you see that they have received the criticism and adapt, right? But back to this economic problem, I think China will still remain assertive but more selective. They will not have resources to throw around, and so it will be more focused. I think they will pick certain projects and then really make it work. And as I also mentioned, I think we need to look at different levels of the Chinese state, because actually the Chinese state is very complex. And actually, it's not the state in the traditional sense. It's also a party state, right, with Communist Party at the top. But so we see the Chinese state. We also see the level of Chinese state-owned enterprises, right? Big Chinese state-owned enterprise. We also see the level of Chinese businesses and gray businesses, right? I would argue, right, that in the levels of state-owned enterprise and businesses, we will see even more assertive Chinese going abroad. going out, especially with opportunities at home being different from in the past. So if you are a Chinese companies, big companies, you actually have to think about diversify your portfolio, diversify your business. If you want to grow, you actually have to think about other markets, especially the developing market. Because China is growing at 3 to 4%, you have to find Vietnam or other places that can grow, still grow at the rate of 5, 6, 7%, and still perhaps doesn't have the governance structure as rigid as in China right now. Right? So I would say that there's a mixed signal there, and it's excited to see how it will develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn. Actually, like that, one of my questions as well, like the GSI and GDI, how it's going to affect the, the directions of the BRI overall. So, but then when you talk about the, the Chinese going to be more, still remain assertive, but more selective, right? Will that affect, like developing countries? That still remains relying on Chinese assistance investments in the old sectors, especially like manufacturing productions. Thailand, still agricultural base. Of course, we have manufacturing, the large base of manufacturing, and these developing countries still, kind of expect that the Chinese gonna come and invest in these kind of projects, infrastructures, low-skilled productions, those kind of things. So, do you think like this kind of selective, policy of the BRI in the future is gonna affect a Chinese influence in these economies in these countries, in developing countries, especially in Thailand? Ajahn, do you have any?
When you talk about development issues, investment issues, I think I learned from the past. And I think China has changed a lot. When China came to Laos 30 years ago, it comes with civilizing mission. It comes to northern Laos to grow rubber plantation. And it's a G2G development project. But these rubber plantations was presented as poverty eradication project. This is a term that also Zhao Wei used when he started the King's Romans. He wants to eradicate drugs in the Golden Triangle. He wants to eradicate poverty in the region. So he built his empire on that land concession based on civilizing mission. But these days, civilizing missions is no longer possible. We have to talk about business deals. We need to talk about win-win situation. We need to talk about more clearly plan in terms of investment. But we also see a lot of new line of investment in terms of development going through. For instance, in northern Thailand and in northeast, there's a big Chinese MNCs, Tencent. We're starting a cattle trade project whereby farmers are invited to join in a contract farming in terms of fattening the cattle and export to China. And you can buy the cattle from the company, and then you fatten it for 4 months, and then sell it back to the company. By buying grass, buying animal feed from the company, and this is guaranteed by the company. If this kind of deal comes through, I think the farmers would be happy to deal with that. But from history, we learn in the hard way that development doesn't come that easy. It always comes with side effect, and it's the people who have to pay the price when when it comes to this type of project. The relocated people in Jiaowei's case are still fleeing to Thailand. They cannot return because they don't have any employment. They don't have any real job back home. So they are stuck in this type of void that we call global development initiative as part of China. So I'm not that optimistic. Once I would like to say that we have to look at the scheme project by project, and we cannot just look at it as a zero-sum game one way or another. We cannot look at it as a win-win situation always. China loves to use this term, win-win situation. They use it in banana plantation in Laos too. And the environment problem is still haunting Laos farmers to these days. Okay, thank you.
I love your banana plantation research. I always give my students when I teach Chinese foreign policies, on Southeast Asia, this kind of research to see what the impact of the Chinese investment in Southeast Asia. That's very interesting research one. So Ajahn, do you have anything to add on these issues?
Yes, very interesting how the impact of the Chinese investment, the banana plantation is a good example, Ajahn. But I think that this reflects the broader weakness or limitation of the Chinese approach. Just because of the nature of China, they deal on a government basis. There's no consultation with civil society because they don't have civil society. So they get things done by very top down. But then it can also be a source of weakness and limitation because, if you take a survey of people in a broad random survey of people in Laos, in Cambodia, in Myanmar, and you ask them their views towards China, I don't think it's very favorable. The government deals with China, but I think the people, society, has a lot of criticism, reservations about Chinese investments. Selected countries, more selective, I think that now we have to be wary of China's economic slowdown. The trend in Southeast Asia is that we need countries around the region need China, and I think in the whole broader world economy. We need China for trade, investment, technology, but we are concerned about China on regional security, on China's geopolitical assertiveness, South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait and so on. So when China faces an economic slowdown, this is a big worry for a lot of countries. Thailand is courting Chinese tourists head over heels by exempting visas and trying to get the numbers up. But you can see that even with all the government efforts to lure Chinese tourists, there's limited, and they're not coming back in droves in millions. Like in 2019, I think we had 11 million Chinese tourists. Now, not even 4 million, despite all the various efforts. So the slowdown is going to impact, the region and the broader world economy. We used to be concerned about the economic strength of China, but now we're also concerned about the economic slowdown. I would just say, the GDI, GSI, GCI, these are post-COVID reinforcement, refinement, and maybe upgrading of the pre-COVID BRI. I don't know what the conclusion was at your seminar, Janjot, what the GDI was. Was it a BRI 2.0 or is it a complementary scheme to the BRI? But you can see that it's post-COVID. It coincides after COVID, a kind of a relaunch, a new effort, and I think to regain momentum again, because I think China suffered more than other peer competitors during the COVID period. It was, the borders were closed longer. The sufferings were a lot more, and it was slower to reopen. So I think the GDI was partly designed to regain momentum. And also a way of multilateralizing China's efforts. Multilateralizing meaning that fundamentally, I think this is a broader battle for global order, if you will. It's a very broad term. So, we have a certain kind of a rules-based international order, and China has been labeled as a revisionist power, both by the US, but also now the EU countries, the UK. And for China, I think it's their way of seeing a different world order, a different way of implementing their view of the world. And that's why we see all these various schemes, and they're trying to multilateralize it. I think it will boil down to whether China is doing something that I think has never been done before, which is to have a centralized political control with a market economy deeply enmeshed in a world economy. The Soviet Union never made it, and it never got enmeshed with the world economy. It had its own system, and it collapsed. It was defeated. But China is doing something that I think, for example, the economic slowdown. I mean, people talk about Japanification, the real estate bubble, and this debt, accumulating debt, and so on. But then, normally in other countries, in other major economies, when this happens, they would have a response by fiscal stimulus, some kind of a pump priming. You saw that in the U.S. subprime crisis, for example. But China is not doing that. If you want to buy a house in China, the collateral, you have to put down a deposit of 60 to 90%, minimum of 60%. So it's not over leverage. So my question always about China is whether China knows something more than we do, whether China knows something more than the market, whether China can govern the market in ways that have never been done before. South Korea, Japan, they had the developmental models earlier. Eventually, they plateaued, but China is still going strong in a slower way, but still rock solid. There've been a lot of literature about China's collapse. I remember many years ago, there's a whole book on China's coming collapse. And all the time you see articles, on a regular basis about how China is going to collapse, because it just doesn't make sense, and it's not logical. How can you have a centralized political system like this, running a market economy, and governing big techs? We don't hear about Jack Ma so much anymore. Jack Ma was so in the U.S. Jack Ma would be God. All these Jeff Bezos or the Zuckerberg. Jack Ma is like a Zuckerberg. But in China, he got hammered, and he knew his place. So the Chinese, state CCP party, they are governing the economy, the market, in ways that have not been seen before. I don't know in the long term they will succeed or they will collapse, but so far they have defied conventional wisdom.
Okay, like when you talk about like the role of China as the developmental actors, right? Like we talk about BRI, that kind of pictures. But then, when we look at the global context now, like we are facing a lot of conflict, wars, across the world, in Ukraine, in Myanmar, in the Middle East, and these areas actually overlapping with the BRI plan, right? I mean, like the first Eurasian land bridge, right, passing through Moscow and then go down to Ukraine, go to Poland, and then go to Europe. And Myanmar, we have like what you were mentioning, the Indo-China Economic Corridor. In the Middle East, we have the China Central Asia, West Asia Economic Corridor. Do you think like these conflicts gonna bring China, into another level, like being as the security actors, playing more roles to protect its economic interests in these, BRI route, in futures? is trying to, right? I mean, like to be like sort of, but not active enough to kind of mediate the conflict, but has kind of voice, to echo about this some kind of conflict in current Hamas-Israel conflict. China was mentioning about this support two-state solutions, whatever. So, do you think China is going to turn, to be more, active in security arenas? Janelle, perhaps.
I think it certainly wants to, right? But the question is whether it has the capacity to do that. Right? For example, in the Middle East, certainly if it can play a role in the Israel-Hamas conflict, I think it would love to. But there's a real question of China's capacity, China's understanding of its the Middle East history, China's bargaining power to different actors, still very different, I think, from the US. If you talk about this region, for example, the Myanmar issue, the South China Sea, China is part of that dilemma. The Myanmar problem, my sense is always that there's not much or enough understanding within the Chinese leading apparatus on the Myanmar problems. You have to understand that in the past, I think the leading diplomatic apparatus in China would focus on the major powers diplomacy, right? The US, the West, the Soviet Union, and actually the research, the think tanks about the region is not so much centered in major universities in China even, right? But in small universities in provinces in Yunnan, in Guangxi, but you cannot find really good research center on Southeast Asia in Beijing or in major Chinese cities. So I think there's a gap between its aspiration and its capacity to really make a difference in terms of mediating with these conflicts. But yes, I think the view for China is that a more stable region, a more stable world would benefit China economically. But then I think it's in a difficult spot of being in a very turbulent region and the world.
Yeah, I think that you can see that China is trying to exert a global security role, being the leading voice, trying to be a leading voice of the global South, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the previously non-aligned of the countries, the BRICS countries, and broadly, maybe kind of the leader of the rest, what we used to call the West and the rest. China is trying to play that role, and you can see that at the UN, you mentioned Jan Pongpisut about the on Palestine, it wants to promote a two-state solution. So it's providing alternatives for a lot of the countries that had less voice, less role, perhaps, and the reception from those countries, I think, is positive. Interesting about the Middle East, before the Hamas attack, the U.S. and China were playing peacemaking roles in the Middle East, and the Middle East, in fact, was being realigned. You had on Israel already had Egypt and Jordan, but later on UAE, Qatar, Sudan, Morocco, and more countries lining up to normalize with Israel. But China also tried to play a role by reaching out to Iran and bringing Iran back into the fold, Saudi Arabia. So you can see this kind of competition about who gets to make the rules, who gets to make the peace, and who gets to mediate. And China and to Ajahn Am's point, I just don't know if China's various efforts will be stymied and denied by competitors, by the U.S., by Western powers, and if it is denied, what would China do? And we have defense build up, military build up. We have a lot of tension now between militaries, so it's not a good omen. Not a good omen because it could lead to conflict. It's not unimaginable now, unlike 5 years, 10 years ago. And you look at the various conflicts we have, from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Myanmar civil war, the Hamas, and then South China Sea, Taiwan, and so on. These are tensions everywhere. And if China's effort to play a role and protect its interests, pursue its interests, is denied, then that could lead, I think, to conflict.
I have one question to bring back the focus on the region and the BRI. One of the channel for the BRI in the region was the Lansang Mekong Cooperation mechanism. How do you perceive it now? And in your opinion, how efficient this mechanism, this regional mechanism, is based on your research and experience?
We haven't talked about this for years because I think during Obama trying to get back to this, but China has already overtaken the areas, right? And once now the states trying to get back, and I think it's too late because China has already dominated the issue. MRC is not working. I'm not so sure what else is a significant development. They are trying to raise the issues in order to launch an attack on China, which I don't think it's working. So that is all about. I remember.
So this is a Lansang Mekong Corporation, LMC. LMC. It's called the Lansang Mekong Corporation Mechanisms, LMC Mechanisms. And they've had, I think, 3 summits. So it's analogous to, say, BRI summit. China's attempt to make the rules. Previously, there were a set of institutions, framework, the Mekong River Commission, the Mekong Agreement, the Mekong Institute, even Konkan. But China was an observer, and then China started to construct these upstream dams, a series of upstream dams, and then the Mekong then became a kind of a new geo-economic arena between the upstream China and then downstream, like say Vietnam, Cambodia. The problem with the Mekong region is, of course, the midstream countries, Laos and Thailand, partake in this dam construction, even Cambodia. So the country that's most disadvantaged is Vietnam. So I think China's way was to impose or suggest impose its own rules on the Mekong River resources, and then to encourage or entice others to play by its rules. Has this succeeded? Well, it has summits, and the Mekong countries attended, I think, obliged to attend in a way, but there have been pushback, not just from the U.S. Obama Lower Mekong Initiative, which has been kind of outdated, but then now there's a U.S. Mekong Partnership, but there's a Japan Mekong Partnership, there's a South Korea, Jan Pongpisut knows this very well, and Australia also has a role in there. So the Mekong is now like a very competitive region, geo-economic region, and China, is I think it's limited than before because it has other challenges elsewhere.
Perhaps I'll add to Ajahn Thitinnan's point. Even though like China, is now facing a lot of like multiple stakeholders in the Mekong regions, but it has like what I was mentioning, it's fast at delivering, right? I mean, like the fund and the projects and non-committal kind of like approach to the Mekong regions that attracts a lot of countries in Mekong, because they need economic performance and hence political legitimacy. So basically, perhaps it's not like very fancy now, but then I think it's undergoing like a very interesting turn because it's still a lot of projects still executed and very interesting to see like how it goes in the next 5 years because China will not let go this kind of initiative as you mentioned want to write the rules especially governing the water management over here. So we still see China's pushing for the LMC and perhaps less under the international spotlight, but all the ongoing projects are tremendous. I think like almost 1,000 projects each year that China committed to fund. So that perhaps we can see how why some countries like Laos and some of Thailand and Cambodia interested in joining this LMC. But anyway, any question? Gentlemen.
Winston Chow. I'm from the Asia Foundation. I actually have kind of two questions. First, thank you very much for this great panel, and it's great to see that there's kind of a diversity of opinion about the BRI. I like the way Dr. Yos described it as sort of shrouded, and that there's some truth in that, and of course how it was also described as an idea and a guidance, and this kind of goes into the idea that do you think, the first question is for Dr. Tung Narun, does describing it as an idea and a guidance, although I think that holds a lot of truth in the way that it's managed, may gloss over a little bit of the large major structural changes, including the introduction of an entirely new ministry in the Chinese governance system and reorganization of resources for both domestic and overseas priorities, and its immense in that immense apparatus. Take, for example, that every ministry and regulatory authority has substantial personnel dedicated to strategizing the BRI. So just because it lacks consolidation may not mean that it's not heavily coordinated. For example, the BRI has structural enforcements and incentives with large state-owned enterprises. For a specific example, the National Development Reform Commission's mandate that China Minmetals and some of its subsidiaries to actively sell China's steel industrial capacity to other countries with a large focus on Africa. Now that in itself is an immense reorganization of industrial and economic resources and deputization of corporations. And remember, China's state-owned enterprises make up some of the world's largest corporations. I think they're at least a quarter of the top 20 largest, to carry out transactions and investments in developing countries that have major impact. So I don't know if describing the BRI as a soft power instrument, technically it may be true, but we have to consider it has the characteristics of the hardest kind of soft power. That's very substantial economic power. So my question, I guess, is how do you resolve the apparent softness of the BRI while acknowledging the immense resources it wields through China's state-owned enterprises? The BRI is almost unprecedented in that sense as a transnational global economic plan with real financial teeth, right? And then remember the second question is for Dr. Yos, and that goes to the research that you're doing in the Laos Special Economic Zone. Very, very interesting. Very interesting topic. I was just wondering if you were able to delve more into kind of the details of how the criminal enterprises capitalize on the BRI substantively. So other than saying that they're claiming just to be a part of it, how has the BRI facilitated the Golden Triangle Economic Zone in Laos and the King Roman Casino specifically? And how has the King Roman Corporation used BRI exactly, other than sort of claiming affiliation? More specifically, maybe what are the sources of investment for the new airport? For instance, are they sources of investment that are facilitated by the BRI? These would be interesting details if you have information about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we love the term soft power now in Thailand, but I think my point here is soft law, right? Not hard law. Ajahn Thitinan mentioned that China want to write the rules, but I actually think that China is very bad at writing the rules. Right? It is not very good at writing written laws, hard laws. So the things that you mentioned, they are all real, but they are informal. Right? It's institutionalized in a way, but it's not written. It's not clear. There's not like one piece of legislation setting up all these organizations. There's not one written law that you can just see and point to, right? And I think that's in the legal literature. There's a very influential paper called China Inc. by Professor Mark Wu, right? And he actually argued this point that because China is a party state, when it has all this mechanism, it's all unwritten, it's all informal. And so it's very hard for people to challenge it in the WTO. It's very hard people to pinpoint to these different things. So I think that's what I meant by soft law. And yes, I think that it's a very hard in terms of the effects, in terms of the efforts, but it's very different from what we see in the past through Western idea, Western initiative, Western efforts, like the Marshall Plan or like other organizations. Because when the West thinks about these things, they think that it's the rule-based world. They will have a written mechanism, they will have a dispute settlement mechanism, right? And I think that one of the things that make people feel a little bit of discomfort or uncomfortable with the BRI or with China is that, as Jot mentioned, a lot of things is in the gray area, right? We can even debate whether we can say that this ordeal by the Chinese government or these different actors, they may do something fishy, but they may say, okay, it's a part of the BRI, right?
Yeah, that's one other point I just want to add, because even though we see Xi Jinping is trying to consolidate power at the government level, at the CCP, but you shouldn't overestimate the power of the fragmentations of the Chinese bureaucracies, right? I mean, like to carry on these kind of sanctifications of the project, like BRI is good for national, security, good for projecting Chinese power, but then there's no clear line, right? Normally, Xi Jinping is going to come at several meetings, probably a couple of times a year, not every month, even not even every week, like the cabinet meetings, just to say something very broad, right? I mean, and then that leave a lot of room for these fragmentations of the agencies to tap onto these justifications to go on with their own benefits. For example, like SOE, state-owned enterprise in South China Sea. A lot of incidents in South China Sea, perhaps if you look in details, it's actually stemmed from those oil company, right? Not from the CCP itself or not from the government itself, but then as the sea has to project this kind of the power leadership, right? It has to kind of cover up these kind of things. And then when we look from outside, perhaps China is intended to do this kind of thing, but actually just to cover up those small actors in the fragmentations of the Chinese bureaucracy. But then I'll stop there.
I just want to add that I agree with Ajahn Am that Chinese government is very complex, and you have to understand what the difference between central government, provincial government, local government, and various levels of officials that have conflicting interests, and they interpret the rules differently. And these are loopholes that a lot of Chinese interest groups and the criminal syndicates use to channel their fundings in very beneficial ways. And especially they use corrupted officials in the Mekong region to play along with them. So when you have corrupted regimes, you see Chinese syndicates working best in the area. But the way and the way that they move along is how to launder the money is very interesting. I think we need to put more attention on this. The way they move along the borders, we haven't done much of that to touch on this. So I can say that it's very complex, but it's also very dangerous and very difficult to obtain the data. So you need to give me fundings to do to do this research further.
Goose fundraising. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Lambert, French Embassy. In your presentation, it was mentioned that BRI was mostly framed on bilateral basis. So my question is, what is your assessment, for the three gentlemen, what is your assessment of the level of coordination here in Southeast Asia between Southeast Asian countries to deal with BRI? And in particular, is there a kind of coordination between the ASEAN format? Thank you very much.
Coordination within ASEAN, I think we don't have a lot of coordination even within our own issues. So not so much, I would say. But I'm not sure if some of you might know about these efforts to coordinate. But if there's some effort, I don't think it's fruitful or obviously results.
No, and I think that, the answer, I think, is not a lot of coordination. And you can see on the ground, if you look at the Bandung rail, you look at the East Coast in Malaysia, you look at the Laos, they are disparate, not so coordinated. If you look at the map, there should be coordination. The map is very connected, Belt Road, corridors, but then in actual implementation, I think that whole map is very patchy and disparate, not so connected. I would say that ADB was interested for my research project back in 2018 of working with, China was interested in working with ADB, and ADB was interested because they saw that the infrastructure funding was needed. So for a little bit of time back then, I thought, there was some interest in coordinating the SIGPAC at least project, corridor. But after COVID really set everything back, and then since post-COVID, we haven't seen it resumed, any kind of coordination.
Yeah, I would add also even attempts to identify which projects are actually under under the BRI. It's very difficult. Even the Chinese government themselves, right? Kind of ban their own state agencies to sort of identify the BRI project. In Southeast Asia, I have some colleagues doing the regional BRI studies, and it's very hard because it depends, especially in the beginning of the first 5-10 years, when everyone wants to jump onto this bandwagon of the BRI to attract the Chinese investment and Chinese money. Right? But then projects prior to the BRI inceptions in 2013 sometimes got included in the BRI so-called umbrella. So even that very difficult to identify. Not to mention about coordinations among ASEAN. So how we gonna doing this? So I thought you were raising this question.
It seems to me the BRI is very nebulous, and we stick things into it that we want. It's a concept that's actually been around since the 1990s. I had discussions with the ADB in those days about interconnectivity, and the Chinese were very interested when I went to Beijing. We had the same kinds of discussions. It's on a practical point of view, building cities, development, communications, transport, all very important. The Chinese saw it as in terms of actually alleviating inequality within China. And I believe they had the same kind of view for the region as a whole. That was their main concern. They saw it as promoting peace, security, stability, and harmony. Obviously, a lot has happened since then. And the question that doesn't seem to be answered in these kinds of discussions is what's the role of the Chinese military? They're very central to decision-making within China about strategic issues. And the fact that ports are very fundamentally part of what I see as the BRI building, and I was involved in Jiangpu in Myanmar, the discussions between China and the NLD government about that particular port. So I know that port, one of the main concerns was about its potential military use. What is your view of the role in which the Chinese military plays within the development of the BRI?
There's a lot of conversation about how the BRI affects Thailand in terms of physical and social manifestation, but I'm curious about how it's perceived. What's the imaginary in Thai? In China, I think Juliet Liu's work on northern rubber plantations in Laos, she talks about how there's a sense of Thai Fajan, bringing development from Yunnan or thinking, or more of China towards northern Laos. And I'm curious about how that lands in Thailand or Laos, this idea of Gan Patana or Kwam Jalern. Is there elements of Thai imaginary, how is it being perceived or mediated, or is it anchored to like sustainable development goals? I'm just curious about more like different scales, how the government or how local people are thinking about and processing and mediating this idea of development and how it's shifting or not. Thank you.
We are discussing the assessing implications and future prospects of BRI for Thailand and Southeast Asia. In the same context, I would like to highlight is that Thailand is also materializing its one of the very important connectivity project, that it's its land bridge project, which was also discussed by the Prime Minister of Thailand during the third forum of the BRI. And in the same context, I just want to correlate with the BRI. My question from the House is that what are your views and assessment regarding the stance or interest of implementation of the project of China under the BRI initiative? Thank you.
So I don't really have much answers to that, right? But I just want to point to my previous observation that from the initial stage, besides all the infrastructure, urbanization, development idea within the BRI, there's a security dimension. And we see that through the talk about energy security, right? And then that's related to the building of ports. But I'm not so sure how the military in China cooperate or coordinate with the foreign policy apparatus, right? And also with all these talks about the efforts of the Chinese to build ports and whether the ports can be used both in the economics, business sense, and also in the military sense, I think we still know very few about the reality of these issues. So I'm not so sure about the current status.
Chatina, you want to add the growth of that?
Well, I think one implication from the question about the Chinese military and ports is the dual use capacity that Jana mentioned. Djibouti is already one base, but there's also concern in the region about the REAM facilities, whether that will be, what kind of use would that be? Would that be a military base? But I think it's still not clear about the Chinese military's role in BRI projects on ports, except for these couple projects. Yeah.
My take on this is that the greatest achievement China has made from BRI is to strengthen their, I hate to use the term soft power because Thai people have messed it up badly. I would like to say geo-cultural power. China has been able to redefine the term that we use for after World War development in and modernity, the Chinese way. I think this is probably the greatest strength that China has achieved. And Chinese have caught the imaginaries of the Southeast Asian people that maybe we could do away with democracies. We can live with authoritarian government, and we can be happy. We can be rich and civilized without all these unnecessary burden in terms of politics. We leave that to the elite, specially trained for the purpose, and we can concentrate on business and also to civilize the savages. This is, I think, what China has been able to achieve over the past 20 years.
Thank you. Brief answer for land bridge. Anyone?
I don't think you'll go very far. First, the notion of the land bridge puts another nail in the coffin of the Grat Canal. So, to build this canal now is even more implausible, even more unlikely. So, land bridge, I think it lacks many things. I mean, all the impact assessment, all the feasibility studies, and all the, you have to ask the shippers. And from what I've heard, it's just not worth the project, the effort to, if you can imagine, ship, right? Loading, unloading, loading, unloading, and then the cost of it, and then most of all, it's a trial balloon. They want to see if there's any interest. But most of all, it's being headed by a cabinet minister, and I wrote this in an article in the Bangkok Post today, that it's being headed by a cabinet minister who was embroiled in massive corruption. So it doesn't inspire confidence, this land bridge at this time. Yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn. And we came to the end of the discussion. Hope you enjoyed the discussions today and learn something new, from our panelists. After all, please give a applause to our panelists.